am often asked, well, what does an associate producer do? Or what did you do as an associate producer? And the real simple answer is the associate producer is the only one who will associate with the producer. I started out my work in the film industry as an actor. I was under contract at MGM for several years while I was a student at USC. And I attended University of Southern California Cinema School under a very wonderful circumstance when, as a high school senior, I was invited to spend 3 days with Walt Disney himself in Burbank. And Mr. Disney invited me over, and I went to all the meetings with the animators and looked over his shoulders as he would correct one of the colorings of the cells by an animator, and he gave me scripts to read, and it was just a great 3 days for a high school senior. And then Walt said, and I want to help you, Ken, with your road, your trip, your odyssey of becoming a filmmaker. And Walt literally reached into his pocket and pulled out his personal checkbook, not the checkbook from the company. And he wrote on it, tore it off, and handed me that check and said, Ken, this is $5,000. $1,000 a year for 5 years for your tuition to USC School of Cinema. Good luck. So that provided my entire education. So I was at USC, there on the Walt Disney Scholarship, a lot of plays I was in, things in the student body activities, class president, etc. But the growing urge in me to tell stories and make films was very strong. So I got to do that as an actor under contract at MGM. And just about the time I graduated, Glenn Ford had mentored me that whole time. And Glenn was seeing that I had instruction as an actor and coaching. And suddenly Glenn was cast in a film, Experiment in Terror, in which he starred with Lee Remick, and Blake was directing. And I had a background in technical things, have my ham radio license since I was 10 years old, and always was into technical things and building radios and transmitters. And so Glenn had said to Blake, you know, here's this young actor, he can play my sidekick in the film, a young FBI agent, and besides, Blake, you'll get 2 for 1. He can be the technical advisor on all of the FBI radio stuff. So Blake said, I'm sure, well, why not? Please the star, he wants a friend in the picture, it's a kid, okay. And so sure enough, we went off to San Francisco on location of the Experiment in Terror. And it was the toughest location ever. Blake had a nightmare. Every piece of camera equipment, sound equipment, whatever it was, froze in the cold San Francisco night. It was bad luck. Everything went wrong. One night we were shooting the last sequence at Candlestick Park, where Ross Martin, the villain, comes out. And my part as a young FBI agent was to hang out of the helicopter on the skids and chase the villain all around the baseball field. And then, of course, Glenn Ford, as the hero, would come up to the pitcher's mound where I had the villain cornered, and the star would shoot the villain and get all the credit, and away I fly. But that was a bad night, and nothing was working. And Blake wanted to get some shots from the helicopter and the helicopter point of view and of the helicopter flying, but we needed communication. And in those days, not everybody had a walkie-talkie on the set. We had one walkie-talkie between the camera and the helicopter. And this was in 1960-61. So at that particular time, Blake said, let's get the shots from the copter. And then he realized there was no communication between the helicopter and the camera. He couldn't tell the pilot where to go, how to do the shot, whatever. And I watched all this happen. And as someone who was interested in production, I thought, there's got to be a way to fix this. And suddenly I realized, and I said, Mr. Edwards? He said, yeah, Ken. Would you mind if I took a look? Maybe I can fix the radios. And he said, what would you know? And I said, well, give me a shot. He said, okay. And he stalked off. Well, I took a look at the radios, and quickly I realized that the night air in San Francisco's Candlestick Park had coagulated the carbons in the microphones, and they weren't working. So I ran to the payphone in the lobby of Candlestick Park, a couple of payphones, unscrewed the microphone out of the handset unit, brought him back, cleaned him up, slapped him in with adhesive tape from the nurse on the set, used alcohol from the nurse to clean the contacts on the relay, and in 15 minutes I had the radios working. Pilot got in the copter, took off. Blake said, I don't believe this. And suddenly he could talk and communicate with radio to the copter, and we finished the last shot, the very famous shot in Candlestick Park, just as the sun was coming up. And it was the pullback shot at the end of the film It starts right at the dead man, Ross Martin, over the pitcher's mound and pulls back to 4,000 feet, one of the longest pullback shots ever. And we see night closing in like a womb on the dead body. Blake Edwards was very grateful. If we had had to come back to shoot that shot, it probably would have been about, in today's money, about a couple $1 million. And so, when we came back to San Francisco after shooting at Candlestick Park, I continued working in the picture as an actor, and then my time was up, and I said, "Mr. Edwards, can I stick around?" He said, "Sure." And a week later, he called me into his office on location and said, "Ken, I really appreciate what you did in fixing the radios and letting us get the shot." And I said, "Well, I was happy to." And he said, "No, it was your willingness to step in and risk ridicule when nobody else was doing anything." He said, "That's what impressed me the most. It wasn't just fixing the radios." And that was a big lesson. It was about servanthood. What could I do to make a difference? And then he said, "And I'd like to offer you the position as my assistant director." Just doesn't happen. And so then I quickly kind of joined his team and began doing assistant director work, and eventually got in the Directors Guild, where I'm a member still. And that began. And then pretty soon Blake said, "Well, I want you at the camera, so do the dialogue directing. I don't want you just off doing paperwork." And it became a close mentor relationship, from an older filmmaker to a younger person who was very hungry to learn. And that relationship continued for 15 years. And I was so honored to learn from the best. Blake's visual talent, his willingness to say, "Well, what would you do?" Or "How would you do it? What about this?" Or to take suggestions, even though I might think it was meaningless. So what an opportunity to be mentored by not only the talented, but caring, wonderful friend, very understanding person like Blake Edwards.